No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
So this is based on a LinkedIn article that I saw with that same title, The Biggest Leadership Trends to Know for 2020. And there's 5 of them. I'm going to read all 5, but there's only one that we're going to focus on for this episode because I think it's important to focus on, and I kind of have a different opinion on what it means. So the 5 that this article states are, number 1, an increase in flexible time. Number 2, learning to lead remote workers. Number 3, more and more accountability. Number 4, an increase in female leaders. And number 5, employees developing new skills. And none of those 5 I inherently disagree with at all. I look at all 5 and think, yeah, that seems about right. I think some companies have embraced those starting 10 years ago. Others are just starting to get on the bandwagon, but there's no doubt that it's not just for 2020. It's just basically, as we go forward, these 5 things are becoming very, very important if you want to be able to attract and retain the best and most talented people for your business. And so the one that I want to talk about specifically, and we can talk about others in future episodes if our audience is asking us. So send us DMs if you hear this and you want to know about the other 4. But the one that I want to talk about specifically is more and more accountability. And I'm going to read this one little paragraph where the article talks about what it means, and I want to get your opinion on this. So according to this article, more and more accountability means accountability and radical transparency are buzzwords right now because we need more of it in our organizations. As quickly as the news travels, executive leaders can't afford to hoard critical information for their employees. On the flip side, an increase in flexibility and remote work is ratcheting up the need for personal accountability in employees and managers. You will see more and more training and development opportunities for managers to improve their skills around accountability and having direct dialogues. And that's what the article says. What is your opinion? Do you think we need more and more accountability, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I when I hear accountability, I think I hear something different than what most people hear. I think most people hear the term and they immediately think of, somebody micromanaging their people and saying, you need to work harder and do more things and be more productive and
sure.
All this negative connotation of somebody being held, quote unquote, accountable.
Tough conversations.
Exactly, right? And sometimes not only tough, but inappropriate conversations and people you're fired and throwing stuff across an office. And, you have all these different things you start to feel when you hear about the word accountability. What I hear, though, is the continuing raising of the bar and the setting the standard higher and asking people, to show up as the best version of themselves and look in the mirror more often to make sure that you are showing up in a way that is helping you best put your best foot forward to have the greater opportunities into the future. So I hear that a little bit differently, mostly because what I've experienced is when people really start to challenge themselves and show up and say, you know what, I'm gonna stop doing all this silly stuff. I'm gonna really focus my energy. I'm going to make sure that I'm learning every day, and I'm making sure that I'm putting effort and time and investing in myself. I consider all of that to be accountability, just self-accountability to make sure that you're getting the best out of yourself, but also the best out of your opportunities.
Sure. So this is one of those things where I draw a parenting reference to a leadership reference, and that's that I've always believed that people want to be held accountable. I believe there are numerous studies that say that children thrive in environments where they are held accountable. The children that are allowed to kind of just do whatever they want to do, they do not turn out to be productive people. They don't do well in school. They don't do well in work. That there needs to be rules. There needs to be a framework of what the expectations are of any job, even if that job is being a kid in a house. But I think the same holds true for employees. I think employees want to be held accountable. The idea that you are not held accountable to anything will seem very fun for a little bit of time, and then the novelty will wear off for anybody who actually desires to move up or to gain new skills. The only people who will thrive in an environment where there is no accountability are people who are not looking to do anything else besides what they're doing right then and there, and they're just looking to kind of milk the system for as long as possible. They have no desire for upward mobility. They have no desire to learn new skills. They just kind of want to collect a paycheck and go home. And in those people, yeah, maybe less accountability will allow that person to kind of hang out longer, but I don't know if that's necessarily a win. The people who I know that look at whatever they're doing as a stepping stone for something bigger, meaning what they're doing now is not the end game. There's something more down the road. They want accountability because accountability makes them kind of, it's a self-check on whether or not they're getting where they need to go. What I think is changing is that we're moving into a time when people only want to be held accountable by those who have their best interests at heart. And so accountability 50 years ago was, there's a job, you have to do it. If you don't do it, then your boss will hold you accountable to doing that job, and you get 1 chance, 2 chances, 3 chances, then you're gone, or whatever, however many chances it is. And then we moved into an era where it was, well, employees need to be happy, and that's the most important thing, and we need to make sure that you are treating them with kid gloves, and then that's the same thing as accountability. And if you do that, then they will perform. And we know that isn't the case too. It's only the case with a very small percentage of people. The majority of people will not get better in an environment where they are not being held accountable, but they also will not respond well to a leader who is trying to hold them accountable if that leader doesn't actually care about their personal development. If the leader only cares about the growth of the business as opposed to the growth of the individual. And so when I see more and more accountability, what I look at as more and more focus on leaders who have to earn the right to hold their people accountable, as opposed to leaders who just kind of dial back the accountability and in the hopes that their employees improve.
No, I really appreciate that kind of idea there, because like a parent, like a mentor, like when I think about people in my life, the ones that I, appreciated the accountability from were the ones that helped guide me the most. And I would go to them for accountability. I would want to go to them proactively and say, hey, here's what I did. Here's what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts on this? Like, did I screw this up, or was this the right way, or was I halfway down the path? Like, I was going to them specifically asking for accountability, not in the form of what you were mentioning earlier, which like a write up, or to be told that I can't do this, or I'm not a good leader or anything, but because I wanted them to, I wanted to make sure that I was checking myself against people that I really trusted, that I really appreciated, and that I knew would tell me exactly what they thought of it, and they weren't going to hold back, and they were going to be very transparent because they had my best interest in mind. And when I think back to those times, that's when I had the most growth in myself.
Yeah, the other thing I want to reference too is there's a Spider-Man quote that is from a long, long time ago, and the old adage of with great power comes great responsibility. And so the article references a ratcheting up in remote work, and that's driving the need for personal accountability. And I completely agree with that. If you're talking about personal accountability or personal responsibility, you have to have some of that if you are being trusted to get work done without being micromanaged. There are plenty of employees who say, I don't want to be micromanaged, and then in the same breath, they'll turn around and not get anything done unless they're being micromanaged. It doesn't work both ways. If you don't want to be you as the employee should be in an environment where you have the opportunity to choose how that relationship works. And hopefully your leader is one that meets you where you want to be. I've had employees report directly to me that when I take a more laissez-faire approach to leadership and I don't micromanage, because what the natural my natural go-to is to be very far from micromanaging. And I've had employees call me out and say, you know what, I don't feel supported. And then I have to kind of dial it up a little bit for them. And I don't consider it micromanaging. I consider it meeting them where they are, because micromanaging has a negative connotation. It means that you're managing more of the day-to-day process than what the employee desires you to manage. That's what micromanaging is to me. If the employee and you have a good relationship and you're doing exactly what the employee is looking for from you in terms of support, that's not micromanaging no matter how involved you are. You just kind of have to make sure that you're thinking, well, am I hiring the right people if they need this much micromanaging, even if they're asking for it? But if you're talking about personal responsibility, a person who remote works absolutely needs to have that personal responsibility and that personal accountability to make sure that the projects are being delivered on time, that the emails are being returned, that there's communication being given to everybody that you're working alongside. That has to go up when you work remotely versus when you work in an office with a lot of people. But even people who work in an office, if your desire is to kind of be left alone by whoever your direct leader is, unless you're making a mistake or going severely off course, or you're having a development conversation where you're asking for it or it's regularly scheduled, if that's the kind of relationship you want to have with your leader, then you have to have personal accountability in spades. You have to have a ton of it. And so more and more accountability from that standpoint, I think, is going to be needed as companies are expected to do more with less, meaning less leaders, more people reporting to less leaders. Instead of 5 to 1, there might be 10 to 1 or 15 to 1. That's going to require those people who are reporting into that single leader to be able to kind of get their job done on their own for the most part, and not have that same level of one-on-one touch bases daily or hourly or multiple times a day than they would have had in an environment where there is where the accountability is driven more by the leader as opposed to by the employee themselves.
Yeah, no, and what I loved about your example about the employee saying, like, I feel like your lack of maybe micromanaging is that I don't feel supported. That's also accountability, and that
Sure.
is the more accountability is also more people holding their leaders accountable in a way that's saying, like, this is what I need from you, and this is how I want to be supported. This is how I prefer motivation. This is how I want to be recognized. That's an element of accountability as well, where I believe leaders need to be held accountable more, not from their direct leaders, but specifically from their people. And again, if you hear accountability and you think about it negatively, then it's hard to break out of that. If you think of accountability as simply, making sure that people are doing what they said they're going to do, and it's a fiduciary term, and it's just about making things even at the end of the sheet. That that's to be accountable, from an accounting term. And so it's not a negative or a positive. It's simply making sure that things break out even at the very bottom, and that you're accounting for the different types of things. So that's really what I also believe, and I think it's what we base this entire podcast on, was the fact that, as a workforce, we want to help leaders become better leaders. And that means holding them accountable. That means making sure that what they say as leaders they're going to do, making sure that when they make commitments, they follow through on those commitments, making sure that when leaders say they care about their people and work in service of their people, that their behaviors actually match that. And it's not just words that are just out there. So, I like I said, I really like that. And I think it's important to call that out, that if as a leader you are like, well, when was the last time my people held me accountable? If you can't think of when that last time was, you probably may have to revisit what their expectations are of you, and or what's your relationship with them, to make sure that they're not just being like, that's Chris is the boss, and Chris is only 50% of the time doing what he says he does. Like, those things will exist out there in the ethos if you don't do anything about them.
Right. Someone once said to me that I think was a very profound statement. He said the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. And I wholly agree with that. If your people aren't holding you accountable, if they've stopped doing that, that's apathy. That is the opposite of them loving you as a leader. If they are trying to hold you accountable, if they're coming at you with things they think you need to change, that means they haven't written you off. That's a good thing. So if your people have stopped holding you accountable, there's only really two options of why that could be. One, you're perfect. That's not really that's not that likely,
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing is that they don't feel they can. And if they don't feel they can, it means, or they don't feel it's going to make a difference. So, meaning either they can't do it, they don't think it'll land on open ears, it'll land on deaf ears, or they're going to be held accountable to trying to hold you accountable, or you're going to sound like you're open-minded to it. You're going to say, I really appreciate that. That's great feedback. Thank you. How long have you been feeling this way? Oh, everybody feels that way. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. And then back to work as usual and do the exact same thing over and over again. You can only do that like 2 or 3 times before people just say, well, I mean, why bother bringing it up to Chris anymore? Why bother bringing it up? Because they're going to make, he's going to make me feel like I'm really welcome about talking to him and that his door is always open, but it's not going to really change anything. So I'm not going to even waste my breath.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I even think like to our listeners and us being held accountable in regards to our content and people writing in and giving some ideas and saying, hey, you know, we love the show. We love the different concepts. We want more content. You know, we'd love for you guys to share, you know, more thoughts and more ideas about how you see leadership and how you see things out there. So, you know, even this year kicking off the Talent Tuesdays and the Pay It Forward Fridays, you know, at the end of the day, that's accountability to us from our listeners of saying, here's more of what we want from Hacking Your Leadership. And there's even more to come that we're working on currently. So I think that all around, to your point, if we didn't have passionate listeners, if we didn't have people involved in the show, if we weren't answering their questions and engaging them in social media and doing our best to be accessible and to help them work through things, then they wouldn't listen and we wouldn't, you know, continue to evolve and adjust and provide what our listeners are looking for. So I think that I completely will double and triple down on accountability all around is a really good thing. Obviously, it's about how you view accountability and making sure that it's not just a negative hammer and that's the only way that you view it, but that it's a really good thing and it can be really helpful in growing cultures and growing communities when done the right way.
I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
Okay, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want to do. First, I checked the internets for the definition of accountability, and it says accountability is a noun that describes accepting responsibility, and it can be personal or very public. What it doesn't say is a negative action. And so if you hear the term accountability, as we talked about in the episode, and you immediately think of negativity with accountability, then I would definitely say that you may have some work to do with your team, because as leaders, many times we project the way that we see terms or words and we utilize them in that way with our teams, which can then cascade that down throughout the teams. And so if you feel accountability in a negative way, then your team probably does as well. And it may not be something that you can utilize to help build culture and then be able to say, we need more accountability. Most people will hear we need more negative actions as opposed to we need more growth and development through making sure that we individually raise the bar and help each other get better and also help ourselves get better. And then the other thing that I want to call out here from our episode is the ability of being held accountable as a leader. You know, we mentioned it, and if you have to think back for a second and maybe write down the last time your team held you accountable by providing you with feedback around the direction, by letting you know that maybe the behavior or something that you did was not appreciated or the behavior needed to be changed or whatever that is, if you can think about that happening in the last 30 days and write that down, then good for you. You need to double down with those employees and really thank them for building that trust and having that relationship to provide you with that type of accountability. If you have a hard time thinking of an example, once again, probably some work to do there, and hopefully your team is just not comfortable in that space and not completely, ignoring you and not bringing you into situations to help build the culture.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack. I think there can be a tendency in a lot of organizations and by a lot of leaders to a word develops a negative connotation, so the go-to is to change the word, and we see this all the time. We see the evolution of the tough conversations get changed to brave conversations, or accountability becomes feedback, and then there's fearless feedback, and all these different ways we try to change the words around. The words aren't the problem. The behavior is the problem. The culture is the problem. And changing the word is not going to do anything unless you plan on changing the culture and the actions that go along with it. And so if you find yourself in that kind of spiral where that ends up being the go-to, instead of trying to change the word, definitely go back and figure out how to make sure people view the current word differently and in a positive light as opposed to in a negative light.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode